Hallways in the projects on the south side of Chicago were all the same. Dark, dirty, and smelled like piss. It's sad to say that that's something you get used to, but you do when that's all you know. But this smell was different. It was a scent I'd never encountered before, but I heard about it, and in my heart I knew what it was. A dead body. But how long had it been there to smell like that? A few days? A week? Maybe a month? Hard to say. It's not like I was an expert on how dead bodies smelled while they decomposed. Also, I didn't want to scare James, who was already freaked out, as we all should have been. Which is what made me also think, why was Leroy so calm? As James and I followed him through the darkness of the hallway steps, Leroy held the flashlight, guiding us through the shadows, going deeper and deeper into what we thought was a basement, but could have easily been the gateway to hell. We were 13 years old, just three typical young black kids from the South Side projects that had dreams of getting out of the hood, escaping to some fairy tale place we saw on TV. We didn't want to always be scared of getting shot because of you lived around the wrong gangs, whether it was the Gangster Disciples, Blackstones, or the Vice Lords. But honestly, the gangs were never a real problem for us. We had family, friends, and hell, most of the time, we were affiliated, because it's just what you did to survive. The real issue for black kids like us were the slickers that rode through and threatened you all the time. Slickers are what we called detectives, or plainclothes narcotic cops in the projects. I still remember how they beat up Leroy really bad last Halloween because they wanted information about his cousin who was selling drugs on 39th and King Drive. All of the cops were assholes, but there was this one, a 6'4", 200-pound nigga they called RoboCop, that choked Leroy and kept punching him in the side over and over until he cried, begging for this massive man to stop. "Mama, please. I want my mama," Leroy cried as tears rolled down his eyes. How could a grown-ass black man beat on a little black kid and not care? I thought. I guess that's how much slavery messed us up. The white slave masters conditioned us so much to hate ourselves that we really didn't care how bad we treated each other. From the gangs in the streets to the police who were actually supposed to protect us. But like I said, we caught it worse from them than any gang members from our hood. Leroy sobbed, groaning in pain as RoboCop kept punching him in the side while smashing his face to the hood of the car. The other detectives, who were also black, who we gave the nicknames Batman and Robin, mainly because everyone in the hood always saw them together, and Batman was a little taller than the shorter one we called Robin. They both laughed while RoboCop held Leroy on the car, smashing his face into the hot hood while handcuffed, trembling and crying. "Please, I don't know anything. Please, I just want to go home. Please, I want my mama. Mama! Mama! Leroy cried, weak in the knees, sliding down the car as the cops just snickered and mocked him. I guess after all that embarrassment, it was easy for Leroy to admit to us that he peed on himself when RoboCop pulled out his gun and dropped the bags of cocaine on the roof of the car and screamed, "Look at what I found in your pockets, little nigga." "That's not mine. You know that's not mine," Leroy cried. "I'm gonna plant this shit on you and shoot you in the fucking face if you don't stop lying and tell me what the fuck I need to know," RoboCop growled. Torturous stuff like that was just the way they treated us, and the black cops were always worse. Almost as if they wanted to prove to the white detectives they didn't have a problem with treating other black people like animals, because that's the way they saw us, like savages that had to be controlled. Leroy always told us how much that day changed him. I never knew how much until now, while we walked down this pissy, dark hallway stairs, going deeper and deeper into the basement area, where janitors stored stuff. It was a place that was covered with spider webs, roaches, and all the huge, old rusty pipes that drained sewage from the building. Leroy held the flashlight, leading James and I deeper downstairs, when suddenly a huge sewer rat, about the size of a cat, ran past, screaming because we scared it. Leroy didn't even flinch. James jumped, turned to me. "Shit, Ricky, did you see that?" "Yeah, it was just a rat," I replied, trying to stay calm as I thought that thing was huge. We both looked forward, and Leroy just continued walking, barely pausing, turning to say to us, "Quit being so scared. Hurry up. We're almost there." "Where the fuck are we going?" James said. "I don't know. Let's just keep up," I mumbled as we scurried along. The stench was getting stronger and stronger, choking us, but neither one of us had the balls to turn back to go upstairs until we saw what Leroy said he wanted to show us. We had to hurry up a little because the glow of the flashlight Leroy was holding was getting further and further away, and James nor myself wanted to get lost. Even though we were just at the bottom of a building in the projects, we felt like we were lost on some foreign planet or in the middle of a dark jungle with giant snakes, alligators, and other mysterious things that could snatch you into the darkness and feast on your flesh while your heart was still beating. James and I reached the bottom of the stairs, rushing to keep up with Leroy, when we both stepped in a large puddle of something that felt like mud and smelled like trash and sewage. James gagged as he stepped in something mushy that skeeted something on his pants leg and splashed on his hand. "What the fuck was that?" "Ricky! Ricky, look!" I turned, and with the little light that we had, I could see something dripping from his thumb. It looked like dirty green and brown mayonnaise that had rotted, but dripped like pus that came from a giant pimple. "I don't know. Shake it off," I told him. Then I turned to see that Leroy still hadn't stopped. "Yo, Leroy! Leroy! Wait! Hold up!" I yelled until he finally paused. James shook the mysterious dirty mayo off his hand, then wiped the rest of the rotten, smelly stuff on the bottom of his pants. And we both ran to catch up with Leroy. "Hey, tell us why the hell we're down here, or we're leaving," I said. But Leroy didn't show 1 ounce of emotion. He just stood calm. "Why are you fools acting so scary? After all the stuff we've been through, I told you this is going to change our lives forever. We're not going to be punks and treated like pussies, and anyone that fucks with us is going to pay for it. We're not going to live the same way anymore," Leroy said. "Nigga, I'm not playing, okay? This shit ain't funny. And if we get caught down here, we'll probably end up getting in trouble," James squeaked, struggling not to sound too much like a scared little girl. His words seemed to finally break through Leroy's emotionless shell as he turned, his eyes open widely. "Our entire lives have been nothing but trouble. We are the scum of the world. We live in the projects, and we can barely afford to dream about anything other than bullshit, being broke and dodging bullets. Fuck it. If that's what you want, then go back upstairs. But remember, you're walking back into the same shit that you left. Absolutely nothing. You're always gonna be a nothing-ass nigga in the projects in Chicago." Leroy barked, then turned and walked forward into the dark void of the basement. James and I looked at one another, almost frozen, because we both knew he wasn't lying. There was nothing but truth in his words. So we continued following him until we eventually stopped at what looked like a giant mountain of trash, with old tires, plastic bags, cans, cardboard boxes, and anything else you could imagine. "We're here," Leroy said firmly as he stared at the trash, with James and I standing behind him. After a few moments of silence, I built up enough courage to speak. "So what are we doing, huh? Why are we here?" Leroy didn't respond. He just stood quiet, gazing at the huge mountain of garbage and junk, until he finally pointed over to the side at what looked like 2 old gym shoes sticking out from the trash. But as he aimed the flashlight in the area, that's when we saw the rest of the body, covered up by dirty old cardboard boxes and bags of trash. Startled, James stepped back. "Is that a body?" "Yes," Leroy replied calmly. He didn't have to ask me. I already knew from the smell up the stairs what it was. "Who put it there?" I said. Leroy stood quiet, his eyes still gazing at the old sneakers that covered the dead man's foot. Before he spoke, "I did. I killed him." James and I stood still, not knowing whether to believe him or not. Leroy sounded so convincing, and we were completely thrown off. "That's not funny, dumbass," James barked as he stood trying to remain calm. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Leroy replied. "Why did you kill him?" I said firmly, hoping to snap Leroy out of this twisted, weird game he was playing with us. But instead, something that was extremely hard for me to explain happened. Leroy's dark, numb, and emotionless trance changed. He started to cry, as his fingers nervously twitched and curled. Because he hurt me. He hurt me really bad. I didn't want to, but it's all I could think about, and I wanted him dead. I know it wasn't right, but I couldn't control myself like I have in the past when it was easy. But I didn't have a choice. I had to, because he's just gonna go and hurt more people. Folks like us. James started coughing from the horrible smell that was filling our noses, which was starting to overwhelm both of us, along with the buzzing of flies and gnats. It smelled worse than rotten, chewed up pig meat, with intestines that were cooking under a hot sun and maggots squirming from its liver and spleen. Who was he? Were the only words that could curl from my lips. Leroy kept crying as he said, "He was one of the cops that beat me and threatened to put drugs on me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him dead so bad, so that he couldn't hurt me anymore or anyone else. I want them all dead, but I wanted him dead first." RoboCop? Dead? I thought to myself. "This shit isn't funny, Leroy," James barked. "Let's go before they find us down here, and we're gonna go to jail forever," James said as he started edging backwards. Leroy finally started to gather himself as he stopped crying, almost slipping into somewhat of a scared state, like he partially regretted killing the man. So I asked, "If you killed him, how did you do it?" "He was a cop. He had a gun. He was a grown-ass man, and we're just kids." Leroy looked at me. His tone shifted again, and with a cold, emotionless stare, he spoke softly, but with a powerful tone. "We are creatures. We crawl, we climb, and we consume." "What the fuck does that mean? Huh? What are you talking about?" James replied. But Leroy didn't respond. He just turned and walked away. James stood staring at me for a second, then turned and followed Leroy. I stood still, looking at the dead man's body. Was this really RoboCop? Did Leroy really kill him? If so, what did he use? A gun, a knife, or something else? My head was spinning, not knowing what to make of this completely crazy situation or Leroy's crazy cryptic words. "We are creatures. We crawl, we climb, and we consume." I finally turned before Leroy and James got too far away with the flashlight, when my eyes glazed over what looked like a butchered up body part laying on the ground. A mauled hand with only 3 fingers. I scurried to catch up with Leroy and James, all of us silent, not saying a word, as James and I marched behind Leroy, following him through the darkness, back into the dark, wet, slimy floor, past the rotten brown mayonnaise, pus, and up the stairs, coughing, back to the top of the building, until we could run past him, while those words constantly bounced around in my brain. "We are creatures. We crawl, we climb, and we consume." Weeks passed, and James would constantly ask me, "Do Do you think that body was RoboCop? Did Leroy really kill him? And how did a small, frail, and skinny little black kid with glasses snatch the life of a massive man? Hell no, I told James once. Leroy ass too skinny. He's fucking 13 years old with glasses and weighed 100 pounds soaking wet with combat boots. He couldn't stomp a roach, let alone kill a grown man. I thought it was probably just a crackhead that overdosed, or somebody that owed the wrong person money and they dumped the body there, which we both knew happened in the projects because cops found bodies in the Robert Taylor homes, Stateway Gardens, Ickes, and Dearborn homes all the time. Leroy and I were in class together, and he never brought it up, and I never asked. I didn't know whether to believe him or not, and I had too much stuff to worry about in my life anyway. Leroy did seem happy and freer than I had seen him in a while, since those cops beat him like they did. And I just told myself that was his way of dealing with it. He needed revenge, like all of us would, so he made up this crazy story in his head, which was all I needed to believe. It was a few weeks later, after the last conversation James and I had about the situation, when we were coming home from school and the cops and the fire department were finally pulling the body out from downstairs. It was crazy that James and I happened to be walking home from school as the body was being pulled out in a large black zipped up body bag, with men wearing plastic suits and masks over their faces. That's when it hit us, when we saw Batman and Robin, two of the three cops standing there that beat Leroy up. They had obviously been crying as they loaded the big black body bag into the big white van. We stood shocked, speechless, and confused. And just when things couldn't get any worse, I saw something that made my heart skip. It was several men, all wearing all black windbreaker jackets, just like the ones you see in the movie, that show up to a murder scene when something crazy has happened, like a body has been cut up. And that's when I saw one of them carrying a large red plastic cooler with the words "Biohazard" on the side. As I turned to James, who stood still, frozen like a statue, still speechless, he slowly turned to me with fear in his eyes that sent both of us spiraling. But James didn't know that I was already further down the rabbit hole than he was, because he didn't see the butchered, chewed up 3 fingers I had partially saw in the darkness laying on that wet floor, which I knew with all of my heart and soul was in that red box being carried by that man. And suddenly, those words instantly echoed back into my head, bouncing inside my skull as my thoughts dragged me back downstairs, into the darkness, into the stench, the slimy water, and the flies. All I could hear were those eerie, haunting words Leroy mumbled to us emotionally, with dried, soulless tears in his eyes. We are creatures. We crawl, we climb, we consume. We are creatures. We crawl, we climb, we consume.